Today on Behind the Wheel, Jaguar E-Type. Launched in 1961 as a coupe, the eternally desirable Jaguar E-Type was built on the legendary Jaguar sporting cars that won Le Mans. An evolution of the D-Type racing car in both styling and construction, Jaguar continued use of the legendary double overhead cam inline six-cylinder engine to create the E-Type for road use. Marketed as the XKE in the United States to connect buyers with the previous XK 120, 140, and 150 series cars, E-Type has been the recognized name since. The first thing one notices about the E-Type is the stunning bodywork and styling. Revolutionary for its time, it set the automotive world reeling as nothing else came close to the radical shape designed by Malcolm Sayer with the aid of wind tunnel development. Sleek as a FHC or fixed head coupe in Jaguar language. Even smaller looking here as an OTC or open two-seater. The long hood or bonnet and short rear deck amplify the car's sporting intentions. Even the headlights are covered with sleek Lexan for aero, and this style became common on other sporting cars of the time, including high-end Ferraris.
This car here actually was a total game changer as far as sports car design was for the time. Revolutionary in many ways, not only in the way the car looks, but also in the way the car is built.
Jaguar Series 1 cars had the early Moss 4-speed gearbox with all ratios synchronized excepting first. Later cars got upgraded boxes with all gears sneaker meshed. All E-Types were built with a limited slip Salisbury differential, essential in sports cars to improve traction. Front suspension is via torsion bars, which is another racing car practice. Combined with the IRS, provides supple yet sharp handling. The E-Type is surprisingly comfortable at road speeds with excellent feedback via the Motolita steering wheel through the rack and pinion steering.
And one of the first things you notice when you're driving down the road in an E-Type is how heavy the steering is in the parking lot. It's like driving a big truck, but out here on the open road, the steering really lightens up. Get some speed under the suspension, and the whole thing just becomes real easy. It's not too bad here in the cockpit. I'm surprised how low the windshield is, how little wind noise there really is driving an E-Type of this vintage. Normally, more modern cars have got more rake to the windshield, and you get a lot less turbulence in the cockpit.
The first engines were the 3.8 liter. They eventually got a little larger, but this original engine in this here, 265 horsepower, gives a 0 to 60 time, roughly 7 seconds. 0 to 100 miles an hour is about 15.9. And this car here, small in size, only weighs 2,700 pounds. So you combine those numbers with that low weight, and it's really a fine performing car. Maybe not so much by today's standards, but in 1963 it was quite the performance car for sure. The middle of this car is actually what they call a monocoque, which is a lot of pieces that are welded together to form a tub. The front end of the car is actually the subframe for the engine and the suspension that's bolted to the monocoque body. And then the rear suspension and other pieces are bolted up underneath. A couple other really amazing things in the back of the car are these two exhaust pipes that hang out the bottom here, and it makes it sound really amazing because they split the manifold for each of the 3 cylinders in the front and the back of the engine. Also, you can see here, which is the famous Jaguar independent rear suspension with the coilover shocks. Also, the independent rear suspension has got inboard disc brakes on here, which were first for the type of the car. Turning to the back of the car is the trunk or the boot on the car. You notice how shallow it is. Again, everything on the E-Type is very small. There's actually plywood underneath this, and the gas tanks and the spare tires sit underneath here. Not a lot of room in there, but again, sporting cars not known for their grand touring capabilities.
I'm pleased to have some special guests with us on Behind the Wheel. With us now is Bill Timmermeister. Bill's the president of the Lima Auto Hall, and also Bill is the owner of this fine Jaguar that we've been blessed with using, and also the collection behind us. Bill, thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to meet with us tonight.
Thank you.
It's good to have you here.
You're the owner of this Jaguar. I understand that you love this car because it is...
It's a beautiful car. It's the first collector car I ever bought. I bought it over in Auburn, Indiana. I bought it, it's been over 25 years ago.
Right.
And it's a beautiful car. It went through the auction. I wasn't there when it went through. It didn't sell during the regular auction. And it was in a lot called the second choice, or second edition lot, or
right.
refusal lot. It had some name like that. And we went over and looked at it, my son and I, and there were lots of people looking at it, and it had a price on it. And I said, well, it appears that somebody's going to buy this very nice car. I think we ought to let them stay here and look at it, and let's go over and pay for it and get it so they won't be tempted. So we went over to the administration building and paid for it. Came back and somebody came over and said there's somebody's already bought that car. So all the other people went away.
So here in the collection, we're predominantly American cars, and this one stands out. So could it be considered the centerpiece of your collection? And it's definitely different in contrast to the rest of the cars.
Well, I think it's the prettiest car. I've always liked the early XKEs. Mm-hmm. And when I was in high school, we used to stop at a gentleman's house who bought one of the first ones in our Lima, and we'd ask if we could go back and look at it, and it was a 61, which was first year of this body style. Mm-hmm. And it was red, and it was a convertible. And we'd go back there, and we'd stop more than once a week.
Just to look at it.
It was a beautiful car. I couldn't imagine a car looking any prettier than that.
Right. So you remember when the E-Type was introduced that first year? What was people's reaction to the car?
Oh, it was very much in demand. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was much in demand, and it was very quick for its day. You see people advertising in car magazines today that their car will go 0 to 60 in 4, 5, 6, 7 seconds. Mm-hmm. Back then, most cars wouldn't do anywhere near that.
Right.
And fast was 8 or 10 seconds, 0 to 60. Mm-hmm. And I don't. This beat most all of the others, especially any that were in that price range.
Right. My number sheet there says about 7 seconds to 0 to 60 in this trim. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And one of the most interesting things about the Jaguars and their convertibles is I had my son drive it home because we came over in a car, and it was a terrifically awful rainstorm. And when he got home, I said, well, you might as well have had the top down. His hand was all wrinkly and white from wiping off the inside of the windshield. But Jaguars are known for not being good cars to be out in the rain in, especially the convertibles.
Even roll-up windows, still not that great. So as I'm looking over the collection here, we call this a keeper. This car in the collection's a keeper. Your favorite, perhaps?
From appearance-wise, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I think that my son, looking at the cars that I have, I think this is the car that impresses him the most. Mm-hmm. That he probably, if I were gone and it was up to him as to what was going to happen, this car would probably continue to be around, and probably a whole bunch of the other ones would be sold.
And stay in the Timmermeister family for some time.
I would think so.
Right. Very good. Well, thank you again for joining us tonight here on Behind the Wheel. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And now, back to some more time behind the wheel.
Cruising the E-Type is just a really easy experience. Really calm in the cockpit, very comfortable car actually, a little bit on the small side for somebody about 6 feet tall, but very enjoyable to spend a beautiful day out into the open top, rolling down the road here about cruising speed. Very nice. Not a harsh ride at all, very smooth. You can see how this could be a grand touring car with the closed top version. Here with the top down, a little more relaxed, a little more sporty perhaps. Moss gearbox, very easy to shift. Clutch pedals kind of heavy, but not too bad. Get into some curves here. Enjoy some of that four-wheel independent suspension. Torsion bars up front, coilovers in the back. Feeding on that copious torque from that 6-cylinder out of the corner. It's a good feeling. Gentle squeeze on those Dunlop disc brakes. Very good brakes for a car of this age.
The long-lived and much-loved XK 6-cylinder engine is highly regarded and can be found in numerous guises in all Jaguar cars of the period, including four-door sedans, also known as saloons. This Series 1 car has the 3.8-liter version, which likes to rev and is less refined than the 4.2-liter version which followed. The use of the inline configuration also contributes to the low center of gravity, compact packaging, and excellent handling manners. Triple 2-inch SU carburetors are fitted, fed by an electrical fuel pump in the rear of the car. The comforting growl of the pump before hitting the starter button is a reassuring sound considering the often maligned Lucas electricals. The use of double overhead cams in the aluminum head complement the traditional cast iron block below. Compression ratio is a conservative 9:1, and 265 horsepower is reported at 5,500 RPM. Inline 6s are prized for their torque, and 260 foot-pounds is available. These numbers, combined with 2,700 pound curb weight, allow 0 to 60 miles an hour in around 7 seconds, with a top speed of around 150 miles an hour. These numbers were excellent for the early 60s, and still surprisingly sporty for today.
Another feature of this Jaguar and the cars of its era are the wired wheels. Also inside of here, the Dunlop disc brakes, a very first for this kind of car in the sports car world. But we call this a knockoff wheel. And this knockoff is actually just what it says, because it's from a race car's pit stop strategy. When the car would come into the pits, and the mechanic would just knock this off with a mallet, spin it off, set it aside, new wheel on, put it on, and knock it back on. And that's what knockoffs were all about. Later Jaguar E-Types are distinctive because of an actual nut here that you would use a tool to knock it off of, because actually of the United States regulations as far as safety, they outlawed the true knockoff wheels.
Looking at this fabulous car is pleasure enough, but to drive an early E-Type is truly special for the car enthusiast. A rare treat, especially as the value of these cars rises and easily exceeds 6 figures. Reaching for the controls, one instantly feels the wood of the classic Moto-Lita steering wheel. Thin and delicate, it transmits the nuances of the road and suspension directly to the driver's hands. Walnut is used for the shifter knob, again with very direct connection with the driver's hand. Once underway, shifting requires some deliberate effort, but becomes natural within a few miles. Blip throttle downshifts are best left to experienced drivers, and a skill not many modern drivers have mastered, but rewarding smooth shifts up and down are a result. This is not a tiring car to drive, and the fixed head coupe would make for a true GT or Grand Tourer in the classic sense.
And now another special guest on Behind the Wheel. With me is Ron Wilson. Ron was a service manager at Sports Cars Incorporated in Fairborn, Ohio, 1959 through 1962, and that's when these cars were brand new. Owner of numerous sports cars and motorcycles, and my personal inspiration for my love of cars, and he's my dad. So, Dad, so great to have you with us tonight on Behind the Wheel.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
It's good to having you here, and just thanks for taking the time out of your schedule. You remember when this car was new, when they were introduced, right?
I do.
What made that launch? What was the buzz? What was the big deal when this car came out? What was that all about?
There was nothing like it. Mm-hmm. That was the big shake. There was nothing like it. I worked for a small dealer in Fairborn Sports Cars, and they got 3 of those, first load, and it was quite a crowd around.
1961.
Yeah. A lot of interest in that automobile, just from the paperwork and the stuff that was put out in advance. Even General Motors was interested in that car.
So the GM folks were interested in the car, but what was the average guy on the street's reaction when they first saw this car?
Well, the first thing they thought about, we'll never be able to afford that thing, this fancy car. It's a low, sleek, Jaguar was a low, sleek car. This thing here wanted to follow the 140 in that era. I even owned one of those.
Yes.
But this was a completely different looking automobile. The hood even opened the wrong way.
Same basic engine, block and head as the 140.
It didn't change the mechanicals, but the only mechanicals they really changed was the rear axle.
Right.
It was an independent, and it was inboard brakes. And it was quite a difference, though. Yeah.
So Sports Cars Incorporated, Fairborn, Ohio. What's the typical customer? Who would come and buy? What kind of person would buy an E-Type when they were new?
The people that I remember being really interested in that were younger people. And one man comes to mind. He owned a restaurant in Springfield, Ohio. And when those were sitting there, he had an order in. He had heard about that car. Even in those days, people read about things like that. There were automobile magazines on the market.
Road and Track or something like that.
There. It hasn't changed a whole lot. But yeah, there was an interest in that car. Nobody thought they could afford that car. It really wasn't that expensive.
$3,500, something like that when they were new?
If you had $4,000, you could buy every accessory there was for it.
So you were the service manager of the dealership. Now I gotta ask, were the Lucas Electricals really that much of a problem? Everybody says, don't drive around after dark, right? That's the joke. Don't motor about after dark.
If you didn't get them wet, you're probably okay.
Well, England is not a dry place.
It's the truth. But we had trouble with the fuel pumps, particularly on the 140s. They made some changes when they went here, but they used a lot of mechanicals
from the early cars.
From the other cars. Yeah, this engine was in a lot of different automobiles. They changed the cams. They changed the carburation from 2 carbs to 3, from larger to these are 3 slightly smaller but very adequate. And the 3.8 sedan was a fine automobile. It had the same running gear till you get back to the back
solid
end.
rear axle, right?
Yeah. And the engine didn't change much at all. They were easy, very accessible engine to work on. Until you had to take the pan down, particularly on the sedan models. It was almost impossible, and they were always having a rear main seal leak. And the pan had to come down. So you had to jack the engine up and do all kinds of funny things just to get the main seal changed.
Right.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of other cars coming in and out of the dealership, Austin Healey's and MG's, and what made this car different than those cars?
It's Jaguar.
And that name, right, brings
I wanted a Jaguar.
Everybody wanted a Jaguar. This came off the back of your coveralls when you worked at Sports Cars Incorporated, right there.
Yeah,
Is that
Yeah.
cool stuff or
Yeah.
what? You didn't think I was going to pop that out?
No, I
did you?
didn't. But I knew we had them
Yeah.
someplace. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually the right off the uniform there
Yep.
from Sports Cars Incorporated.
Actually, we
Fairport,
wore
Ohio.
shirts and pants, and we were all white. Look, you'd think we worked at Honda down there.
More things change, the more they stay
We'll
the
just
same.
stay the same.
Well, very good. Well, thank you again, Dad, for joining us here tonight. We've had a special night and some special time with the cars, so we appreciate you taking the time and sharing your stories with us.
Well, it's great to be here and talk with you guys.
And now, back for some more time behind the wheel of the E-Type.
Nice series of curves here allow us to really get a feel for how the car moves. Dunlop disc brakes, really good stopping power for a car of this era. You can feel that torque right through the mid-range. Very characteristic of an inline-six engine. The old Moss gearbox, very easy to shift, but in this car, 63, first gear is not synchronized.
And we'll be right back with more Behind the Wheel.
These Jaguar convertibles had a very easy to operate top. Very high quality cloth with a full rear window in them. Very simple to operate in. In contrast to cars of the time, these cars had roll-up windows. Typical sports cars of the era had snap-in side curtains, so that is another piece that makes the car much more luxurious than your typical sports cars of the time. Another piece that makes them very different is what we have, a curved windshield. A curved windshield on a car in a world of Austin Healey's and MGs that were just a flat piece of glass. Very different, again, makes the car more upscale and more expensive as well. Moving around the car under the lights of being indoors in the shop, the curves of the body really come to life. The way the lights hit this, especially with the black paint. And it makes that chrome jump out off the black paint. A lot of contrast there. A couple stylish pieces here on the car. These Lexan covered headlights, very unique for the time, unless you had an upscale car like a Ferrari or an Aston Martin. Not only do they have aerodynamic capabilities, come right off the race cars, but they just look really cool. The later cars actually had open lights instead of the closed lights. Moving across the top of the car here, one feature that just jumps out to you right away is this power bulge right here. And this indicates to everybody seeing the car that there's that big 6-cylinder engine right underneath there as well. Right next to the bulge on the hood are these extraction louvers. The air coming in through the front of the car through the radiator actually passes through, and instead of going out the bottom or on the side of the car like many sports cars, these louvers actually allow that heat to roll right out of the engine compartment that way. Many sports cars are criticized for being difficult to get into. The Jaguar E-Type convertible is very easy, provided the top is down. When the top's up, it's pretty difficult to get inside, but this one here, not so bad. Once inside, you can tell there are some very luxurious appointments still that set this car apart from other cars at the time. These true bucket seats have Connolly leather on them. Connolly is a very high quality leather in Europe. In England, and the Wilton wool carpets were very luxurious at the time, not just a vinyl floor mat. Another thing that sets this car apart for the time is a padded dash, when back in those days most dashboards were just a metal piece. One thing that sets this Jaguar sporting car apart from the other Jaguars of the time was the lack of any wood inside. And that, aside from the steering wheel and the shift knob obviously, but that speaks to its sporting intentions compared to the saloon cars that Jaguar made. A couple really key points: this centerpiece of the car's interior, the steering wheel made by Modolita. stamped aluminum and polished out with this very thin wooden rim. It's actually very comfortable to use, but it is the centerpiece visually of the entire interior. The gauges, very typical of the time, Smith's gauges from the speedo and the tachometer. Actually has a clock set into the tachometer. Water gauge, oil gauge, fuel gauge, all by Smith's, and the ammeter was done by Lucas of the time. Shown here to the right is the choke lever. Cars of today obviously don't have to be choked to start up, but when you turn the key on, you hear the fuel pump start, and then the choke would be turned on like this, and the red light shows that the choke is on to alert the driver that he probably needs to shut it off after the car is warm. These cars warm up very quickly. Choke pulled back down in an off position, the light goes back off. These early cars are also set apart by the toggle switches. When you see an E-Type Jaguar and you see the toggle switches, you know it's an early car, because later on they went to the rocker style switches. Very black inside, but lots of small trim pieces out that set off the black with chrome pieces for style. Lots of chrome here, like on the parking brake lever, and this very bright work aluminum finish out through the center here is also another thing that sets off and contrasts is all the black in the car. But this car very well appointed for a vehicle in 1963.